Ladies and gentlemen, please join us.
And it's lovely to share a platform with two of my colleagues. One of the things that's happened because of the whole debate on Brexit and what's going on, there's a lot more cross-party working now in Parliament, and it is nice to be here with the two colleagues who on this issue we have very similar views. I want to also pay tribute to the Bruges group, who over many, many years have to use that expression, kept the faith with this issue, and the work that you all have done and the commitment you've shown, when I'm sure way back many of you thought, would we ever get out of the European Union? And it is just wonderful that in such a relatively short space of time we have gone from being told that we could never leave the EU, that it would never be even possible that we could have a referendum, to get a referendum and to get a leave vote. And so much of that is down to your persistence and your continued work, both locally and nationally. So thank you all, and thank you for turning up today. I just want to, I'm not going to go back into a lot of history because there's so many experts in this room, and I see a few faces who I wouldn't like to be involved with a kind of tit-for-tat on the detail of some of the issues, particularly to do with trade. But I want to just remind people really of some key statistics. And what I'm really talking about today is trust. Trust that I think has been lost now between politicians and the public. And actually trust that is now being lost in Parliament between members of Parliament and the government. And particularly even members of the Cabinet having lost trust in the Prime Minister. And I don't say that with any great pleasure, because I genuinely thought when Theresa May made that Lancaster House speech that that was going to be very, very significant. We could all welcome it. We could all see that this was going to be the way that we were going to leave. It's not our fault in this country that the way that Article 50 is designed means that we have to go through this ridiculous process to leave. I don't think people understood that it took this amount of time. And I think the last 2 years has been, for most people, completely something that's been going on in the background. Even members of Parliament, even very, very involved members of Parliament, haven't really known what's been happening. And we've ended up 2.5 years later with a situation where we're still in the dark about what the true motives of the Prime Minister and the government are on this issue. I won't go into what the true motives of my leader and his motives are, but I have to say that I do, on this issue, continue to stick up for my leader on Brexit, because I know, having been in every single division with him over 30 years, that every time there was an opportunity to vote against the EU, he voted in that division. So he is now leader of a party. He is trying to keep a party together, and I think that is probably some of the motivations for some of the, what I would call constructive ambiguity that our party has on the EU. But let's just remember that on the 9th of June 2015, Parliament, by 554 votes to 53, voted for a referendum. And that referendum, we know, was very clear. It was, we were handing the decision to people. We were handing the decision. We'd really abrogated our responsibility. We had given it to the people to decide, and they were told, do you want to stay or do you want to leave, and your vote will be honoured. And it wasn't just Brexiteers saying that. It was people like even George Osborne actually said, your vote will be respected. But of course, what George Osborne also said was it would be absolute calamity if we voted to leave. People say, oh, but we didn't know, the Remainers say, but we didn't know how awful things could be. Well, we did. We voted knowing that people like George Osborne were saying, if you leave, this is going to mean unemployment going up almost immediately. This is going to mean recession. This is going to mean extra new special emergency budgets. All those things we knew. So the idea that people out there, and this is what makes me most angry about some of the people leading the Remain campaign, the absolute ignorance and abhorrence they have about people who voted to leave. the onslaughts on their reasons why they voted. We've all been called racist, we've all been called ignorant, we've all been called stupid, and that has been led by people who actually are out of touch with the public in this country. They may not be. London's a little bit different, and they may not be out of touch with everybody in London, and of course London did vote to leave, but let's not forget more people voted to leave in London than voted for the current Labour Mayor, Sadiq Khan. So we had that referendum result, and then of course we went on to make sure that the actual I think it's very important to say, just after that, just before the referendum, there was a survey where it was asked how MPs then were going to vote. And I think most MPs are honest and probably responded in the way they meant. And of that, at that time, that survey showed that 480 MPs then said they would be voting to remain. 159 said they'd be voting to leave, and 11 were undecided. So 75% of MPs before the referendum were going to vote Remain and supported Remain. That is just as big a margin now in Parliament, even since the general election, despite the general election showing that in both manifestos there was a commitment to honour the referendum. So the people now who are arguing within Parliament about needing to extend Article 50 or needing a second referendum are all people who started off being people who wanted to remain, could not believe that the public had ignored them, could not believe that actually they had not been listened to. They, even some MPs who do think they're experts, I certainly don't think I'm an expert, but a lot of MPs do, they could not believe that they were not listened to. And it's that lack of trust now, because the public does not believe really that Parliament has ever actually wanted to leave and has ever wanted to get these negotiations on a strong footing. But the trust also has broken down because we have seen time after time the Prime Minister saying something and then going away and talking to probably her friend Ollie and getting a different view. How our civil service is being, I think, really, really dangerously becoming something that is now going to lose the respect. Because sometimes people had a lot of respect for the civil service, but they may not have had the respect for the politicians. What we saw last night and the very interesting leak from the ITV Journal about what Ollie Robbins had said in a bar, presumably we were paying for his drinks as well. that actually, I think, is just another nail in the coffin of respect for the institutions. And that is what's so damaging and so worrying about what's happening now. Because people are beginning to, more than beginning, are actually losing faith with the whole of our institutions. And that's very, very bad for our democracy. And all of us in this room want to see a thriving democracy. But if the politicians and the civil servants try to spend their time to go back on something that was clearly voted for, then that is what is going to happen. So I want to see, I've made it very clear that I don't like the withdrawal agreement. I think it's, I certainly don't like the backstop. I mean, the backstop is just outrageous, and I will never vote for anything that allows Northern Ireland to be separated out from the rest of the United Kingdom. What makes it even more annoying and angry, makes me angry, is that there was no need for this. Enda Kenny, when he was the Taoiseach, had started to get the civil servants to talk to each other, to talk about solutions, because yes, there is something that would have to happen, but it didn't have to be anything like what people talk about, a hard border. And the idea that this is what has become the crunch issue is just ridiculous, and it's been pushed particularly by the Irish government, working hand in hand with the European Union, because what it's really about is keeping the United Kingdom as a whole, but using Northern Ireland as closely linked as possible to the EU, because they want to continue to have their court overruling us, they want to get as much regulatory alignment as possible, and they want to get our money for as long as possible. And we have, the Prime Minister, I have to say, has fallen into that trap. And I did see her the other week when we had the opportunity, and I told the Prime Minister very clearly that I thought the perception, maybe I was being a bit nice, but the perception was that she was standing up and working with the Irish government's views much more than the people of Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom. So but of course, even if we get the backstop, and remember Parliament voted to actually get rid of the backstop, you know, there's so much else in that withdrawal agreement, and many of you will have read the detail. And the more you read the detail, the more horrendous it is actually what we might be signing up to. And it is a half in, half out. It is actually tying us down for a very long time. And the idea that somehow a WTO terms going over to WTO would sort of bring more uncertainty is complete nonsense. Going over to WTO would stop the uncertainty right away. And the paranoia almost, and the complete and utter nonsense that's being talked about, and all the scare stories, it's so obvious that that is being driven by the establishment, being driven by big business, who the CBI, who actually want to keep the fact that they they won't have the competition, and they're driving at. But the sad thing is that even in Parliament, even members of the cabinet don't seem to have enough confidence in our own country to actually be challenging that. So my message today really is, first of all, we have to try and make sure that people out there and the people who voted to leave know that there are many people in the country who are determined to stop us being sold out, and you're very much part of that group. But also, I think we have to continually try to get the narrative back onto the positiveness of what a WTO would mean, and that it isn't the disaster and the jumping off the cliff and all these great metaphors that have been put forward, and that actually people did not vote for a deal. They voted to leave. No deal is better than a bad deal. That is something I fundamentally agree with the Prime Minister on. And there is no doubt about it that this deal that was concocted up over 2 years, and she must have known that she would have some trouble, or if she didn't know that, then she's even more out of touch with what's happening in Parliament. So that she hasn't signed up to it. The country has not signed up to that treaty, and we have to stop it going through the way it is. And I don't want to see a second referendum at all, but if we are pushed into a position of having a second referendum, then just like people have been arguing, no deal must be taken off the table, Remain has to be taken off the table, and what we need is a referendum if we're going to have one which is the Prime Minister's deal or a WTO deal. And country would actually vote for WTO. They want out, they want their sovereignty back. What we're getting at the moment is a half in, half out, not what people voted for, and I will continue to do what I can in Parliament to make sure that we get that in 44 days.